The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the Cancer Presumption Fund, something that's kind of new to us in the state. And we've got a lot of questions, and we're starting to get some experience with the fund, so we want to kind of share some of those with you this morning. We're glad to see you here today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. My name's Sean Abbey. I'll be kind of moderating this thing today. I'm a second district vice president with the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union, and I'm a battalion chief with the Kentwood Fire Department, where I've been for over 25 years. So welcome, and we're glad you're here. This is being recorded, so keep that in mind. If anyone needs to hear this again or anything like that, definitely feel free to. This will be out there. I think we're going to put it on for sure on our website, and I think maybe even we'll link it through gov.delivery. Quick poll for everyone. If you just take a second to answer that, how many have you ever participated in a webinar? Just take a quick second to answer that. Give another couple seconds to answer. Oh, looks like we're kind of all over the place. Yes, quite a few. So we got about a third of each. So welcome. If this is your first one, we're glad you're here. A little bit about the webinar itself is there's a control panel, and you can see that right here on my screen. You've got some things here. You can raise your hand. You can ask questions or type questions, things like that, which is very helpful. If you need to reach out to me, you can send me a chat or a message here, and I can ask questions for you. If you've got questions for one of the panelists or a question for me, just type it in there. If you see a screen you like, there's a screenshot feature up here, so you can actually hit that button, and that'll save that directly to your desktop. So that's kind of nice as well. And then there's, I think I hit on that, the raise your hand feature. There's also handouts. So there's 4 handouts down there as we go through. You'll hear about some of those. So make sure you download the handouts as well, and that's on that control panel as well. And make sure you participate. If you got questions, if you want to raise your hand or whatever, make sure you do those things. It helps make the webinar that much better. Really quick, we'll talk about a little legal before we get going too far. This webinar is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. We do not have time to address anyone's particular individual case. For any specific legal advice, we recommend you seek the counsel of a competent legal attorney. So now we got that done. We'll be on our way. We have a great panel this morning. We're very fortunate to have some of the top people in the state to deal with this topic. First off, our Michigan Fire Marshal Kevin Selmeyer out of Grand Rapids. He's been the state fire marshal and the director of the Bureau of Fire Service since 2017, since April last year. He spent 31 years with the Grand Rapids Fire Department, where he retired as a deputy fire chief. If you're on there, Kevin, if you share your webcam real quick. If not. Next, we've got our state president.
Thanks, Sean. Good morning.
Oh, there you are. Okay. And just so everybody knows, too, the fire marshal's in. He's kind of cutting in and out. He's got meetings today with the training council. So thank you for taking some time out to be with us.
You're welcome.
Our Michigan Professional Firefighter Union president, Mark Doherty, has been the president of that organization since 2010. He's spent over 23 years with the Sterling Heights Fire Department, where he's currently a battalion chief. And he spent over 20 years in the union, working from the executive board all the way up to the state. Thanks, Mark, for joining us. We also have our MPFFU General Counsel, Michael O'Haron. If you can pop up your webcam there, Mike. Mike's been the general counsel for since 2007 for the state, and he's been practicing law for over 20 years and currently represents over 50 locals around the state. So thank you very much for being here, Mike.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least is Scott Sheehan. He's a past president of the Glen Lake Fire Department, where he spent over 8 years and been in the fire service for over 15 years. He was recently diagnosed with testicular cancer in August of 2017. He also had surgery to remove that tumor, and he's been through this whole process, including some of the appeal process. And he's currently under an aggressive surveillance schedule for at least the next 5 years, treating his cancer. So there's your panel today. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. So thanks, guys, for being here. Really appreciate it. We're going to get this thing rolling now. First, I kind of want to talk about, we're going to hit on how we even got here. Why are we here? And Mike and Kevin are going to let us know how we got to where we're at today. So let's go ahead and start with that, Mike.
Well, the section that contains the cancer presumption, before the cancer presumption was there, we had the heart-lung presumption. And that passed in the early 80s. And that was a little bit before I started doing this for a living. So despite the fact that I'm in my third decade of representing unions and primarily fire unions, I have never known a time since I've been doing this when the MPFFU wasn't fighting to get the cancer presumption. There was extensive lobbying in Lansing by Paul Huffnagel and Melissa Yutzi, now Melissa McKinley. I think when we first started going after the cancer presumption, Melissa was probably still in high school. So that'll tell you how long we've been doing this. Mark Doherty picked it up when he became MPFFU president, and really, we always had great participation from members, phoning their legislators, emailing their legislators. Mark and Melissa did an amazing job up in Lansing. We had several bills that were floated over the years that sometimes never even made it out of committee. It just seemed like, despite the fact that people gave us lip service for the support that they had for our bills, they just never made it where they needed to go. And I can't help but notice that even when Senate Bill 211 passed in December of 2014, it was only after we started getting some media attention and some of those legislators started taking some negative press for not moving that bill along that this cancer presumption ever really became a reality. So this is a decades-long battle that finally culminated in a little bit of relief for our members through this First Responders Presumed Coverage Fund that we got passed in 2014. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is the nuts and bolts of how that long history has played itself out and what the reality looks like today.
Fire Marshal Selmeyer, you've been, like I mentioned earlier, you've been 31 years in the fire service. So kind of, can you remember some of those early years, those early fights when states like California and things like that were getting the cancer presumption back in the early 80s, if not late 70s, how that looked?
Yeah, I think it's, thanks for having me on today, Sean. And it's good to be here to talk about this topic. And, I think that the slide says it all, right? A long, hard-fought battle. I can remember back in the late 80s going to Lansing to lobby on fire issues and with the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union. And, we had this dream of someday that we get cancer presumption. And I think it was, my recollection goes really back to about 2001. I was named to be on the Safety and Health Committee and then went on to be the chair for about 6 years in the middle 2000s. And, the work that was done by Larry McCall and Terry Chesney and Paul Huffnagel and, the Safety Committee that had been long established and had continued to work. And then see Mark Doherty come in and get involved in committees and, just really the change that we saw. And I can remember back in the mid 2000s, we thought that was the year. Many times, as Mike shared, we would think we had a chance. It was introduced. It didn't get out of committee. We thought this was the year. This was the year that we're going to make it happen. So it definitely has gone on for a long time. And, it's great that we have this now for the coverage of our members, but I think one of the things we have to look forward to the future is that I don't think the battle's over, in the sense that, you know, we're seeing a lot of other cancers that are coming, that are popping up on the scenes, that are related to blood type cancers, and we know that our members are being exposed to stuff while they're engaging in fire suppression activities. So it's something that I think we'll continue to see evolve. So one of the things that Sean wanted me to share with everybody is to look at, you know, what are the cases so far, the stats year to date. We've had 11 cases processed, 5 have been denied. One of the things I really want to stress is that, and we'll get into the nuts and the bolts, so to speak, as we move through this, is that make sure that you do file that claim. I think in a lot of cases, people say, well, maybe I don't qualify or it doesn't apply to me. The best thing that we can do for our members is get them to file that claim, and it starts at their own department with a workers' comp claim. Of the 5 cases that have been denied, some of them have been paid on call firefighters, or it's been retirees. I find myself as a retiree, 31 years in Grand Rapids, that I was exposed to many things during the time of my career. But you know, there have been other retirees that have had cancer, been very fortunate not to. But as we move forward, we need to make sure that we are getting those documented. And also, one of the things, part of the process is, I think that they'll share later on, is that it's going to get denied at your municipal level, at your city, township. And so that will clearly explain how we move through the process. There's been over 90,000 claims that have been paid out to this point. And we'll get into the financial side of it as we move forward. There's some funding that's going to come from the Medical Marijuana Bureau as they step up some of their efforts, and licensing at the Bureau of Marijuana is also going to have the ability to bring some funds back into this cancer presumption, and that we take care of our members. So I'd like to thank Sean and Mark and all the other panelists for this opportunity to be here this morning. This is the 3rd webinar that I've done with Sean. I want to thank the Michigan Professional Firefighter Union for blazing the trails, so to speak, as we try to communicate better with the fire service. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. And Sean, you have any other questions?
No, I really appreciate you being online with us today. As a fire marshal, I think it's, I think it's great that you're so supportive of us, and the fact you're here today just kind of shows that. So thank you for your support, and we do appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Thank you, and you're welcome. And we're going to keep pushing here at the Bureau of Fire Services, also on the education side. We've got to, as we move forward, reduce our risk to our members also, so that we don't have to make these claims. But boy, it sure is. Think about all the battles and all the effort over the history of our great union here, the Firefighters Union in the state, to get this coverage for our members. So thanks for getting out there and sharing it with our members. And if you all need anything, please reach out to me. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks. Take care, Kevin. Right. All right, Mike's going to kind of talk a little bit about 515, how we got it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is Mark. My bad. I'm sorry, I read Mark. Mark, can I talk a little bit about the passage of 515?
Sure. Gonna want to talk about where we started from. Obviously, Mike talked about a little bit that, this has been an ongoing fight for 20 some years. We began this fight. There were very few states that actually had the presumption, but we kept being persistent and kept moving forward. We kept everything to data-driven facts, which help certainly in passing anything. But as you've been told, 20 years of getting these bills buried in committees. At one point, it was buried in tourism committee because they knew that I was a rep or a senator that wouldn't move it. We face a lot of political challenges, but we remain consistent with the data, remain consistent with the efforts, and it paid off, obviously. One of the things we talk about who supported us, we had cross the aisle support. We had Republicans and we had Democrats, which definitely helped us out. Our biggest adversary to this was the insurance companies and the MML, Michigan Municipal League. The interesting part, though, there was a shift made a few years ago And the shift was they stopped arguing about whether or not we were exposed, whether or not we were being injured on the job. They actually in committees admitted we were injured on the job. And that was a change, I think, that finally started helping us. There's enough data out there, enough research that they couldn't deny it anymore. But if you remember over the last 10 years, we went through quite a recession. So that became their argument, is they use a tactic of let's hyperinflate how much his cost will be and turn around and claim broke because all the communities are struggling. So that's a challenge we had to face. At one point, Blue Cross Blue Shield had argued that an annual cost to give us presumption would be $108 million a year. Well, as Kevin said, our claims to date, and it's been a year and a half, has been about 90,000. So nowhere near what Blue Cross had said. The frustrating part to us was, we could counter Blue Cross's numbers by talking about the 35 other states that have presumption. None of them saw a greater than a 1% increase in premiums. So you would think, armed with all this data in these other states, that we'd be able to overcome that. Well, we weren't able to because of the strong lobbying force of Blue Cross. Blue Cross actually employs every lobbying firm in Lansing. So it was a big uphill challenge. But like I said, through persistence, through a lot of work from you guys, through a lot of work at the Capitol, we were able to finally expose them for the lies they were saying. So when we got it passed, the thing that kind of turned it for us was creating this fund. So you guys, the question always comes up, is how do we get this first responder fund in the first place? Well, we mirrored it after the DUS fund, which is a fund that was created for more of the building trades, people who are exposed to particulates and breathe it in and come down with certain diseases through that. So we mirrored it after that and then got general fund dollars to actually fund it. So really what this is a no-cost item to your municipality or the insurance companies because the money is coming directly out of the fund. Now the fund initially was funded with general fund dollars, but it wasn't necessarily taken right out of general fund. So where it came from was actually the Forest Development Fund. This
All right, we're gonna go Mark will go next here. We'll kick over. There you go. And you and Mike can hit on this.
So the money came out of the Forest Development Fund, initially a $3 million deposit. That got us going. That money is still what we're using. What's starting to come in now is a long-term source. So that was our short-term, but we knew we needed to find a long-term source. So that new long-term source is off of the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act of October 1st, 2017. They now go in and tax the medical marijuana dispensaries. So off of that, we take 30% of that 3% tax on their gross sales. They believe it will generate around $5 million. That money is just starting to come in. So the fund is financially sitting very well right now with funding, but we also are aware that if we get one really extreme case of someone with cancer that is going through a lot of treatments, an example I give is in my local, Chris Slazak. He's about $1 million a year, and he's been fighting leukemia and the complications from it for 9 years. He is probably in himself a $12 million case at this point. So there's potential out there that the money could be used up, but we do have a sustainable source at this point, so that's good. It is proving to help our members, and it's proving to do exactly what we wanted to do. So.
And before we get into the source now, Mark, we'll get to that in a little bit, but currently talking about the money, and Mike, you can chime in on this as well. We were kind of talking about it's almost like a budget thing, whereas if you don't use it, you're worried about losing it. And really that can't be the case here because like you said, we could have years go by like this one where we've got $90,000 or $500,000 and then next year it could be $4 million. So if we really need to build up the fund in those down years, not just say, oh, they only used 100,000, so we're going to cut. Do you see that being a battle going forward?
I do not see that as a battle at this point because we have this long-term source.
Okay.
So as long as the money comes in as if we expect, we'll continue to build that money up, and the money does roll over. So once it goes into fund, it cannot be removed by the legislature without another act.
And Mike, if you want, we were just talking, if they look at that pot of money down there, let's say it grows to $15 million just because over the next 5 years or whatever, and they need money. I hope we can just make sure we keep that education piece up to where, it's my point being for our members is we can continue to, the fight's never over, because if there's a big pot of money out there, people are going to be looking at how they can get, not necessarily they can't take it out of there, but they can decrease our funding because they think that we're set, which we really aren't.
Well, one of the things that I get concerned about is looking at the way we got our initial $3 million. That came out of a fund elsewhere in the state budget. It did come right out of a fund that is part of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, which is there to protect the state's forests, to reforest the state forests that are subject to logging. And the legislature pretty much swooped in there and took $3 million out of their fund on a one-time basis to create our fund. And so I think it speaks to the importance of keeping up the relationships that Mark has talked about, as far as the people in the legislature who would stand with us and oppose that kind of raiding of our fund. Mark, you've spoken about how Lara actually has tried to get a hold of the fireworks money that was intended for training. So those kinds of things, it's difficult for me not to view this fund in context of our other experience with the legislature and the state government.
We did create a system, though, if the fund does run out of money, that they are required by law to maintain a list, a priority list of how the claims came in that will be paid when it gets refunded again. And we kind of did that to put the extra pressure on the legislature that if they do fail to fund it properly, that we have sadly a list of claimants that aren't being taken care of that we can use to try to affect them to get more money put in.
Right. And I'd just like to make one point before you move on there, and I think you're going to cover it in just a minute in a little bit more depth, but that is the main reason that it's important to be sure to file a normal workers' comp claim with your employer at the outset, because the law does say that you're going to suspend your workers' comp claim when you're eligible to draw from the fund. If the fund were to become insolvent, to have not enough funds to pay the claims against it, those claims become reactivated. And while the presumption is not effective in a regular workers' comp claim, you would have to prove the work-relatedness of your illness if you were pursuing that. At least that claim would be in place at a time when the funding potentially might not be there.
Yeah, good point. And we will hit on some of that in a little bit, Mike, but that's a great point. Going forward, we're going to kind of get in the nitty gritty now. We kind of talked about how we got here. Now we're going to talk about the fund itself. And just a quick poll, how many forms of cancer are covered? You kind of see the results from everybody. We stopped at 10, and that is the right answer. 10 is currently 10. And we'll let President Doherty talk about the overview of the actual act.
Okay, when the act was created, there had to be, I'll go back up. When the fund was created, I talked about that there was opposition with the insurance companies and the municipal leagues. There was compromises made. And part of that was the efforts of the lobby, or the opposition, the Blue Cross Blue Shield particularly. They wanted to make sure that when they filed a presumption for cancer exposures, that it was from your primary job. So you'll see that it is only for fully paid fire departments. That was a compromise because they would argue to the legislators that we don't know what their full-time job is and what their exposures are out there other than the paid on call job. So paid on call volunteers were excluded because of that reason. Now the hope is down the road to get them also included once we get some more data and money. But it was a stepping stone, and it was a place we had to start. So I get that question a lot: why the legislature excluded paid on call or part-time workers, and that's why. The restriction of 60 months was something else they had to have to, in their mind, ensure that the exposure came from the job. They don't want people coming on with 1 year and turn around and file a claim for exposure, which it still could be, but again, that was insurance criteria. But this is also 60 months as a full-time firefighter, so it doesn't necessarily have to mean with that particular employer. The 10 forms of cancer came out of research. They're all data-driven to show the direct link between exposures on the job. There are more cancers coming out every day. There's a current bill right now to add breast cancer. There's a study that's just coming out linking breast cancer to exposures on the job also. Interesting note, we did a survey of our members, and some of you guys may remember this a couple years ago. We did a survey monkey of our members and asked if you've ever had cancer or currently have cancer to respond, and then to respond with what type. So of the respondents, so of our approximately 4,000 members, we had about 75 respondents saying they did either have it or currently have it now. Of those 75 that responded, 70% of them had skin cancer. So that's just something to remember. Skin cancer is very curable if you catch it early, but it's showing the exposure levels we're getting on scenes and that it's absorbing into our skins, and it should reinforce why we do the things we do to protect ourselves and decrease that exposure as much as possible. So the other provision here said you have to be an active member. This is one we fought hard to include retirees, and it just wasn't happening. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand this. So if you are accepted to the fund while you're active, you will carry that coverage into retirement. They will continue to treat your cancer and your claims into retirement, but you can't make application to the fund if you've already retired. That is something we'll work on through the years too. We understand, the latent period of cancer, and when you develop it, typically is in those years after you separate from service, and that's a vulnerable time, especially when we have a lot of members now that don't have retired health care. So it's going to be an issue, and this is going to be an ongoing fight to continue to expand it to the appropriate areas. That's one that we'll be working on hard. Pension benefits, again, part of the process of application is you have to show that you're not receiving any pension benefits. That's a simple letter from your pension board or your city, township, saying that they are not currently receiving any pension benefits. If you are within a month or two of retirement, that does not matter, as long as you are not receiving pension benefits at the time of diagnosis of the cancer and application to the fund.
Real quick before we go on, Mark, with the funding, just so everybody sees, the handouts are there, and it's got a really nice layout of the actual law and what that looks like. And the 10 forms of cancer are respiratory tract, bladder, skin, brain, kidney, blood, thyroid, testicular, prostate, or lymphatic cancer. And I'm only mentioning those because if someone watches the recorded webinar, they won't have access to those handouts. But you can also get those on michigan.gov or on our website as well.
Thank you, Sean. Another thing that we need to add as part of an exclusionary issue on here is regular tobacco use. That had to be put in there, again, by the insurance companies insisting on that. This is one that we've talked a lot with the director of work comp about. He believes it's a very gray area. If you are denied for regular tobacco use, please file an appeal. It is something he even said you need to push. If you can show that tobacco use does not have a direct link to the form of cancer you have, which in most of these cancers there is not, you should still be able to prevail and get your coverage. Also, how they define regular use is another issue. So that's just a point we wanted to make. If you are denied because of tobacco use, make sure you consult with us or an attorney and push the issue.
And then you kind of hit on the funding already, but if you want to go over that again really quickly, based on the medical marijuana facilities license.
Yeah, so now we do have the sustainable source. This medical marijuana facilities, they passed a 3% tax on gross sales to regulate the facilities, and with that, we were able to capture 30% of it. We believe it to be about $5 million a year. It could be more. They're just not sure. It could be even a little less. But that money's starting to come in now, and we're going to see where that takes us. And if it's not enough, then we'll push to get a higher amount. So it's a constant evaluation process. But like Sean says, we hope to have some years without large claims to try to build some money up also. Once we get a sizable amount of money in there, we will be more confident that it should be able to cover whatever we need. But you got to remember also that just because a claim happened in 1 year doesn't mean it's not going to continue. Like I was saying with Chris Slazak, a member of our department, he's been fighting this for 9 years. He is not currently covered because he's prior to the law, but had he been, it would have been upwards of a $12 million claim at this point.
And then now we're going to kind of bring in Scott is going to kind of be on here with you, Mark, as we talk about actually how you get your benefits. Scott Sheehan has actually gone through this process all the way up through the appeal, and he'll kind of give some of his experiences. And Mark, if you just want to kind of start with kind of how would we go about applying for benefits?
Okay, like Mike had said earlier, you want to file a claim with your employer first. The same as if you hurt your back or if you broke your leg, file a claim with them prior to filing an application to the fund. As soon as you file, most likely when you file with your employer, they're going to deny it. Now you make application to the fund and submit the application, there's a third-party administrator that administers the work comp first responder fund. It's either York or the actual work comp department will send notice to your employer suspending your claim. That is a process that work comp wants you to do. And Mike explained a little earlier why, is if the money does dry up, then you still have your claim with the employer. But that doesn't mean the city is off the hook for anything because their claim's suspended. And we'll get into those details a little later. But send the form in. Once you start that process with the form, you'll be contacted. And I'll let Scott kind of go through the process since he just went through it. And he can talk personally on how that process went once this form was actually submitted.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So you fill out the first form, which goes, like they said, to the Workman's Comp office. Tammy Ordaway is currently the contact there. She's extremely helpful. Everybody through the process was really great. So she's going to do the initial check of just seeing if you're a full-time firefighter, the 60 months in the job, all that kind of stuff. And then it will be turned over to York Risk Services. And currently the person I've dealt with is Sarah Keel there. And their job as a outside agency is to gather all your medical records and confirm everything. So you'll have to sign a release for their company, and then that'll allow them to contact your primary care physician, any specialist that you've seen to date, and they get all the medical records. One thing through the process that I've felt that was helpful was it's extremely slow. So when she asks for University of Michigan Cancer Center med records, they have up to 30 days to give that. And then if you, in the meantime, you go see another doctor, another specialist, get a second opinion. Every doctor you adds her having to send out through the mail somebody, and then they have up to 30 days. So you can see the process could take quite some time just to get accepted. So one thing that she said I could do is go ahead and contact my doctor's offices directly, explain what was going on, and then they were all, the University of Michigan, everybody was very helpful in saying, yeah, we'll get that right over, and they sent that through. And then York Risk, at the end of that, when they get everything that they need, will contact you with the approval or denial, and they explain if you were denied, in my case, why, and and then where to go from there.
Okay, thanks. The process is actually pretty simple. The nice thing is the work comp director, which is Mark Long, he has directed his staff and York, the company that's a third-party administrator, to get to a yes, is how he quoted it. He says, I want you to do whatever you can to get them to a yes. And we've seen that through the process. We've had a couple strange cases that we've actually gone back to him on and worked through the process on. So one thing we emphasize is this is still a new process for us and them. They want to get you to be able to be supported. They're willing to work with us. So what I recommend is any member that is diagnosed with cancer, they should contact their district vice president. That's a good starting point to say, you know, to work with us, and then we can start to give you updates on how things have changed and help you through the process. But that way we can track it. Again, there's probably, you know, in a year's period, we're expecting around 6 to 8 claims. Something we want to be aware of. If there's rules, processes we need to get altered, we will do that, and we'll work with them to do it. So we do want to know of every case and help you through the process. There's one other question,
Mark. I had a question from somebody. They basically want to know if they contracted cancer before the fund was in place, and they're cancer-free now, but they have some remaining side effects from the cancer that they're currently being treated for and are getting treated now. Could they apply even though the original cancer was before the pre-fund, but they're still currently being treated for cancer side effects currently? I wrote back, I would just apply, and the worst they can do is say no, but what's your take on that? And while you're doing that, I'm gonna, on the screen, I'm gonna go through, if you can close your webcam real quick, Mark, I'm gonna go through on the web to show people the easiest way to get to the fund.
Okay, on that point, sadly, we were not able to go retroactive on the law. So the law does not cover cancers that were, you know, diagnosed on the job prior to the law being passed. Now, there was a period of time where the law was passed, but yet we had to fight to get the funding. There's a 1.5 year period of time. Some things happened in that 1.5 years. You know, there was a failed roads sales tax that you guys remember was on the ballot in the state. Did not pass that, so the legislators then kind of pulled back all their funding, and we lost our funding. So we had to fight to get it to the point. Well, there was people. All right. There's a point that there's kind of a gray area where there were guys diagnosed in that period of time, and we believe weren't going to be covered, but work comp has covered them, or has made attempts to cover them before the money was actually in there. But if you were diagnosed prior to the law even being passed, then probably not. But like what Sean said, always apply. We're telling everybody, no matter if you think you're going to be covered or not, always let them decide that. Never let that be a presumption. So if you apply, it's not hard to apply. They're going to look through your records and they're going to see. So the other issue we have right now with a firefighter working through is that he was actually diagnosed with a skin cancer prior to the law, but now was cancer-free, and now has been re-diagnosed with skin cancer again after the law was passed, and they're trying to claim that that's a pre-existing condition in the cancer, that this cancer is linked to the other one. So we're working through that process right now. There's some exams and appeals processes going on, and we're going to try to get him covered also. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Really quick, I'd like to wrap up some of this stuff, but we want to talk about what if you're denied benefits. And Scott, if you want to talk about your process a little bit, Scott, just kind of talk about your claim and then how you were denied and the process you've taken.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with testicular cancer and went through the process. I was denied, and they denied me what Mark touched on about the tobacco use 10 years prior to being diagnosed. That if you read it on the website there, it just says that has to be scientific evidence. It has to be proven that it aided to the progression and cause of your cancer and so on and so forth. So when they called me and said, hey, you're denied because of that, I asked Tammy, I said, Ordaway from the Workman's Comp office, hey, is there anything I can do? And she said yes. She sent me an appeal form. I filled that out. She explained to me that a mediator would be appointed to my appeal, and then that they would contact me when that all was all set up. So about a month later, they set a date. They contacted me. They did that over the phone. It was a mediator. It was a lawyer from the Workman's Comp office. It was Tammy Ordaway, and it was real easy. They said, why are you appealing this? I said, well, you said I was denied because I used tobacco, and in my case, it's testicular cancer, and tobacco use has no ties. I grabbed some documentation from my doctors from the University of Michigan Cancer Center, handed them out to everybody. So said my piece. The mediator then turned to the lawyer and said, do you have anything to say? And he said no. And he's right. There's no ties, and they now are getting the paperwork going. I had to, you just expect to submit a lot of paperwork from your doctor's office, things like that. But everybody was extremely helpful. I think that whole mediation conference took 13 minutes, if I remember right. And yeah, so definitely, if you get denied because of tobacco use, go for it, keep going on it. So.
And that was just a standard like workers' comp denial appeal, right?
Correct. Yeah, there was no. They admitted that they're learning as they go on some of this stuff, and that was a regular workman's comp form that they sent me. There was a lot of parts in that form, I guess I should say too, that didn't apply to me, and I just called Tammy, and she was extremely helpful in walking me through what pertained to my case and what I just could not worry about.
Perfect. All right, and we're going to go, so we kind of went through this slide, but we're going to hit a little bit more as we go forward with this next one. But I want to start with Mike talking about, we'll go with legal first. We're going to start from the bottom. But Mike, if you can hit on the legal aspect, when should you seek assistance? And then also, I thought it was interesting earlier, you kind of talked about as far as what Scott was just talking about, that it is a new process and there's a lot of people learning as they go. So you kind of hit on that as well, if you could.
Sure. It was interesting for me to learn from Scott that they gave him a standard workers' compensation appeal form, because a standard denial in a workers' compensation case, an appeal goes to a hearing, not a mediation. So the form that we will eventually use in these cases has not even been developed yet. We're so new, this law and its procedures are so new that really even the Workers' Comp Bureau has not developed the rules and regs that it needs to administer this law. I just looked last week, because the law requires the Workers' Comp Bureau to develop these rules and regulations and post them on their website. They don't have any there. So that really is a double-edged sword. It can make claimants feel set adrift and like they're out there alone. But the fact of the matter is, the agency probably has more people paying attention to these claims now than they would if everything was set up already, because they need to have people figuring out what to do about this. And this leads into this next section about when you should seek assistance. On the legal front, you've probably heard me say at many district meetings that workers' compensation is a statutory cause of action. This first responder presumed coverage fund, likewise, is part of the workers' comp law. It's a statutory cause of action. It does not spring from your collective bargaining agreement. So what you have to recognize is that to the extent that you're going to need the assistance of an attorney to get your claim processed, that attorney is going to cost you something personally. It's not like your union's going to provide legal representation for this. So when it comes to when should you seek legal assistance, my advice is you should only seek legal assistance after you have sought out other avenues to resolve your problem and your issue is actually based on a denial of benefits. That's when you need an attorney. You need an attorney to figure out what is the process and how do I argue my case and what are my rights and what can they legally do. That's when you need an attorney to tell you that information. But before you ever get to that, accessing your doctor, you just heard Scott talk about how instrumental information he got from his doctor was in processing his claim. And the union, and I don't know if Mark wants to talk about this a little or you want me to go on about this, but as we've pointed out many times, in the difference between bargaining rights and your rights under your contract versus the statutory rights, to the extent that you collect from the fund, you may have additional benefits available to you through your collective bargaining agreement. And obviously that's when you'd want to be going to your union and making sure that you're getting everything that you should be getting.
Right. Yeah. Maybe Mark can hit on that really quickly because, like you said, there are some provisions in a lot of contracts that make you whole or things like that. So, yeah, Mark, if you want to hit that really quickly, I want to try to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes, though, so we can get to questions and get everybody out of here. But when should the union be involved?
Yes. Yeah, really, the union should be notified in every case because just like you have to look at your contract, like Mike said, and you have to look at what you're entitled above work comp. It's pretty common in contracts around the state to take you higher than the 80% that work comp pays. Now, work comp pays them up to, I believe it's 80% to a max benefit, though. So if you make more than what their max benefit is, you're going to get that max benefit. So it may not necessarily be the 80%. Now, typically, if you break your knee or you hurt your back, a lot of these departments will make you whole. We're running into some cases where the employers are saying, no, that's a presumption of the state, and we're not making you whole like we would on any other injury. So that is going to take arbitration and grievances based on your contract. And in my local particular, we have this very issue is, our member was accepted. One of our members has cancer. They paid him his entitled like benefits under work comp. So the fund pays whatever he would get under work comp if he had any other injury. It's a like benefit. But the employer's saying, no, we don't want to make him whole because our contract requires him to be made whole in every way as if he's still on the job. So they are currently fighting that. So now that takes consultation with your local and your labor attorney to enforce the provisions of your contract. So while he was accepted by work comp, he's not accepted by the city for that other portion. And that's what you got to work through. So it really depends what you're entitled. In some cases, you're not going to know what you're entitled until you talk to your local and have them review the contract. But we want to make sure everybody gets everything they're entitled under these cases. So always consult your local, call your state DVP, get the process going so it's on our radar so we can start looking into it. And like Mike said, if you do get denied, particularly from work comp, then you need to seek a work comp attorney at that point. We can help you through a lot of it until you get there. But if you are denied, we do recommend the work comp attorney. If you're not getting what you believe you're entitled under your contract, then that is going to be your labor attorney in your local. So.
And then real quick before we move on, Scott, do you have anything? I know you stated kind of the medical portion of this, but really that's turned out to be really crucial in your case that you reached out to the medical field to get those supporting documents. I just want to overstate that's going to really help your case.
Yeah, Real quick too, before I forget, to touch on what Mike said about the legal side. When I did that mediation, the first thing the mediator came on before she brought everybody else into it is she asked me, "Do I have an attorney with me?" And I was like, "Oh, do I need one?" And you don't. She said, I went through my thing, of course, on my own. She said you can bring a lawyer in any time afterwards if you're not happy with anything, like the other guy said throughout the process. So just wanted to say that because it took me back a minute when we started that mediation. As far as the medical stuff, most of the hospitals these days have this patient portal, they call them, University of Michigan, the Cancer Center down in Chicago. I found that to be extremely helpful when I gathered my documents to prove that my cancer wasn't tied to tobacco use. I could talk directly through the patient portal, through the email stuff, to my doctors down there at U of M, and they responded, I think, 2 days later with letters, and they were extremely helpful. But I would definitely get that right off the bat if you think you may need that, and that was the biggest thing that helped me through my case.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah,
Where do we go? Oops. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
John, real quick, I just want to add, like in Scott's case, if you've seen 3 or 4 different doctors and you make application, it might be best to have all that info right in front of you so you can give it to them right away, and they can send them all out at the same time. So the more organized you are, the better chance that this will go smoothly also.
Excellent. So I really appreciate all your time, guys, today on the panel, but where do we go from here? Mark, what's our next steps? We talked a little bit about, making sure the fund is there and keeping that, but what are some other things that we're looking at?
As far as adding cancers, we're going to continue as studies come out to add more cancers to the list. We're going to continue to make sure the funding's there. We would like to see this expanded to all firefighters, including retirees. That is something that we're working on, but we have to get more data as far as claim data. So we're just over a year, so we're approaching be 2 years this next October, and that should be approaching a point where we should have some decent data to show, and fight for these other expansions. But they're very leery to expand it at this point without that data. So that's what we're working on that. We do eventually would like to see this rolled into the normal work comp system and get it out of the fund so we don't have to worry about the funding anymore, and it is cleaner. The more data we get, again, will help us to do that in the future.
Perfect.
So,
all right, and questions. If anyone's got a question, they raise their hand if they want to ask the panel. I believe the fire marshal stepped out for his meeting, but we have the other 3 panelists in here. If you have anything, a question, we got a whole bunch of questions here. Let me pop these things up. So hold on here. Let me pull these up. So is there a list of recommended attorneys for these cases?
So we do have 2 law firms that we have on our webpage, MPFFU. We recommend those just because they've had more experience in some of these cases, because we kind of direct most of the people to them. These firms are big enough that cover most of the state. So whatever area you're in, they typically have a partner that's in that area. But you can use any work comp attorney. We just felt it more beneficial to try to push everybody to a couple to get them a little more experience. But it's up to you what you use.
What about members who are in need of treatment, but they're still able to work? Is the fund required to cover this if you don't need to be off completely, just off sometimes? And then what's the difference, on that same note, what's the difference between a 56-hour person to a 40-hour person? How's the fund adjust for that? So I think they're asking if they need to get time off to go get treatments or something like that. How's that work? And then how's that? And what do you think there?
So I believe, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but work comp pays for lost time, for actual treatments, and for mileage. So it's lost time from work, treatments, mileage. If you are still working, then you're not going to get lost time if you're doing this on your day off. But if you do have to lose time from work, I believe this is a case right now that we're going through also, where they're denying a partial day. So the guy works 24-hour shifts and wants to take off, a couple hours per day for treatments. They're saying, well, we're not going to pay you because you're still working. So that's an issue we're currently trying to work through to figure out what the work comp actually pays on.
Okay.
That's what they've made me.
Oh, go ahead, Scott.
That's what they had me do when I, for my paperwork. They contact the Workman's Comp office, contacts my employer. They come up with an hourly rate, after they obtain what I make or whatever. And then when I was for the surgeries, for everything that I had to be off for, they said that they take care of all that kind of stuff, but until I go back. But I had to use my vacation time first.
Okay. Real quick.
Right now, before you
Mike.
move on, though, one important thing to note about a situation like that is if you are using vacation or sick time and eventually your claim is granted and you're going to be compensated for that time, if you turn over the money you receive from the fund to your employer, you can get that time put back in your bank. Certainly, if your contract says you're going to be made whole, you'll get all the time back, regardless of how much you got from workers' comp to cover that. If you're not in a local that has supplemental pay like that, you might only get a portion of your time back. But certainly, anybody who's collecting a benefit from the fund and it corresponds to a time when you burn time, you want to make sure you get your time back and turn that money over to the employer.
Okay. Monty, Monty and I had a question. I saw you typed it too, but your hand was up, Monty. Monty, you on there? Hello?
Sorry, I'm like that commercial. I had mine muted.
Oh, no problem. Go ahead, Monty. Do you have a question?
I also typed it in. I'm sorry. I had heard that one time, and I'm not sure if it's accurate. Does the fund help pay for the appeal attorney?
I can answer that. No, an attorney, when you use a work comp attorney, his payment comes out of your award. So if, like Mike was saying, it's going to cost you, and if you are awarded a certain amount of money to cover your lost time, he's going to take a portion of that through his payment. And Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the fund doesn't pay it. He's taking a portion of your payment from the fund.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Monty. Hope that answered it.
Okay. Yes.
All right. We got some more questions here. This kind of goes on the same track as earlier. If a person's missing time to get there, they're still able to work, but they're missing some time. I would still say that you'd apply for the fund, because even though you're not, because they were told, I believe wrong, that if they're not totally disabled, then they can't file a claim, but that's not the case. If you're still getting treatment. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's incorrect. I mean, you definitely file. If you're not losing any time from work, they'll still cover your treatments and your mileage to the appointments. So you do not have to be permanently disabled whatsoever. That is something that you need to file the claims for.
And let me say this as the labor attorney that represents a lot of your locals. I strongly suggest that you don't just fall back on, well, I've got insurance, I'll just process it through my insurance. What's the big deal? I'm still working. Don't do that, because especially in communities where you're self-insured, where your employer is self-insuring your healthcare benefit, that's causing the cost to your employer to go up unnecessarily and making bargaining down the road more difficult for your local. It's a benefit that's being funded right now that you're entitled to. Just file the claim and get the reimbursement from the fund like everybody intends, and everybody comes out ahead.
Excellent. Let's see. I'm answering a question now. Sorry about that. I hope that answers your question. well, aside from tobacco. Okay, we can't talk about this. Aside from tobacco use, what are other reasons people are being denied? Some of them we talked about with like they might be a paid on call or not fully paid department, and or a retiree. Some retirees are applying for it, but remember the big thing with retirees is obviously we'd like them to be covered because it is a hazard of our job, and no one wants to be. It's like you give up a portion of your life just because of your job. That's not good. So we definitely would like that. But remember, the overall goal of workers' comp is to get you paid and get you taken care of. Well, if you're retired, you are able to, you're able to collect your pension or your whatever retirement you have. So, so those are the other reasons. So I hope that answers your question, Chris. If anyone else has will raise a hand. I think I answered. Can Scott identify how specifically he will continue to receive benefits from the fund now that he's no longer in the fire service?
So
I believe that once you retire, you're going to continue to get checks from the fund. They'll mail them directly to you.
from what I was told on this, my situation is while I was in the fire service, I would get the back pay of the time missed during the surgeries and all that kind of stuff. Now that I'm out, I would get medical coverage for the remaining life of this particular cancer, and that's according to the Workman's Comp office. So I'll be covered on any kind of medical stuff. They said that just the medical side. Now, if I don't get any lost wages or anything like that from here on out, but just my medical stuff is covered.
Correct. So when you're on the job, you get the lost wages and the medical coverage and the mileage. When you are off the job and you're retired, you're obviously not going to get lost wages because you're not working anymore, but you will still get the claims covered for the treatment, and I believe mileage too.
Right. I was going to say I think the mileage should be included as well.
Yeah.
I want to reiterate too. We still get some questions on the local paying for a workers' comp attorney. That's not the case. An individual should seek out a workers' comp attorney, a specific workers' comp attorney. The local should not pay for the workers' comp attorney. Are you with me on that, Mark? I'm imagining.
Yeah, like Mike said, it's a statute thing. It's work comp claims are between the employee and the state of Michigan, and any payment for an attorney comes out of your award. So that's between you and your attorney that you contract with. So we don't have standing to participate in that process as your bargaining group. And it's a separate process from Merck and the bargaining that we do.
All right, we're getting close to the end here. I've got one sticky question left, and I'll kind of hit it because it's kind of interesting. Do you know if any members have gone through the process where they may have either been a full-time firefighter, MPFFE member, and been firefighting on the side, or were firefighting before they got into a career a job, and has the fund said anything about that, where they actually got their cancer? Has there been any fights like that?
No, I mean, the exclusionary factors on there are clear that you have to be a full-time firefighter currently. You have to have 60 months on the job currently. So if you were a firefighter and have since separated service to go to a different career and then develop cancer, you're not going to be covered.
No.
You're not currently
I think they're more saying like if I'm a career firefighter and I'm volunteering on the side. Yeah, thank you, Mike. On the side, how does that impact it? Because it says clearly in the statute that it has to be a fully paid department. Is there the argument to be made that I could have gotten the cancer at my part-time fire job and not my full-time job? And how does that look? Has any of that been vetted?
Well,
yeah.
Mark, if you could give me a second here, I think this is an interesting question that we haven't seen play out yet because of the small number of claims and how new the law is. But the fact is, the presumption that we have is a rebuttable presumption. In other words, if the conditions are not met to support the presumption. And we did have a brief discussion earlier about the tobacco usage. The statute's very clear that the tobacco usage, just having used it within the 60-month period, within the 10-year period, doesn't automatically disqualify you if the agency or your employer, in some cases, can't show that it aggravated or caused your cancer. The issue of secondary employment, whether with another employer or if you're talking about a scabbing situation where somebody is volunteering on their off days, if the agency finds out about it, in other words, York is investigating your claim. If they find out that you are working as a paid on-call firefighter, it raises a question of fact as to where your cancer may have been caused. And certainly, insurance companies are there to avoid paying claims. So it would be like if you were working in a battery factory as your secondary employment. Most employers will challenge the presumption based on that because you're working in another field where you could just as easily, if not more easily, contracted certain cancers working that job. So I think the possibility that you could be denied if you should need this presumption should be another really good reason not to be a scab.
I agree. Thank you very much, Mike, for that. So I hope that helped out. I don't see any other questions. I think I got to them all. I do appreciate everyone's input there. I've got a last poll if you want to take a quick second. Has this class helped you understand the cancer presumption law and how to use it? If you just take a quick second to do that. And while you guys are answering that, I just want to sincerely thank our panelists today, President Doherty with the State Firefighters Union, General Counsel of the State Firefighters Union, Michael O'Haron, and Scott Sheehan, past president of Glen Lake Local and active cancer survivor. We appreciate all of your help and you sharing your stories with us. To you especially, Scott, good luck with all your fight and continue there. And we really do appreciate the insight of someone that's actually gone through the process. I know it's still pretty raw. So thank you very much, all of you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks.
And thanks, Sean, for setting us up.
Yes, yep, for sure. Great.
Thanks
That's what we
very
want to.
much.
Yes, thank you guys. And there you go, 87% is very helpful. If you still have questions, you know who to reach out for. If you're a local member, reach out to your local, reach out to your state association as well. We've got hopefully the answers and we can direct you in the right way. There will be a survey. If you can answer that survey when we're done, it kind of helps us make the process a little better. I know this went long, but there was a lot of questions and some good dialogue. So I hope I appreciate you guys being on here for as long as you were. And thank you very much. You guys have a great day. And
Sean,
yes, sir.
I just want to add one thing real quick for everybody that's still on. For the people who still have questions, I just want to let you know we still have questions. Because this is a new process, we are working through this as best we can and trying to get the rules set up. So please have confidence that we are continuing to try to solve the problems and answer the questions we don't have answers for at this point.
Okay, we appreciate it. And thanks to all of you guys for your hard work. And we'll take care, everybody, and thank you for attending.